Welcome. Divine mandate. The worst thing you can do in a broken system is not fight it. It's to grow out of it. No one told you that growth could hurt you. Not the motivational speakers, not the self-help books, and not the people who told you to just think about yourself. That would have quietly ruined someone else's whole way of dealing with things. The truth is that some systems don't fall apart when they are attacked. They fall apart when they're no longer useful. You didn't come in with a plan to shake things up. You just got different. That's all. No big reveal, no announcement, no dramatic exit. You changed your life, your standards, and your energy. And a group chat somewhere else caught fire. A lot of people don't talk about this, but social structures depend on predictability more than honesty. Psychologists have found that when someone suddenly stops reacting, becomes self-directed, and is emotionally unavailable for manipulation, it makes other people feel the same way as if they had really lost control. To put it simply, when people can't get you to do what they want, their nervous system goes into a panic. That's when the overreactions start, the side comments, the strange behavior, and the sudden interest in what you're doing, who you're with, and why you're not playing your old role anymore. And the funny part, in a dark and ironic way, is that you weren't even trying to be disruptive. You didn't tell anyone your secrets. You didn't turn over tables. You didn't show them they were wrong. You just stopped giving off energy to places that thrived on your confusion. You became inconveniently stable, calm in a way that can't be baited, and focused in a way that doesn't need applause. That's when the breakdown started. Not because you did too much, but because you stopped doing things that were good for everyone else. You're not watching drama right now. You're watching withdrawal. It's people realizing that the version of you they built their hopes and dreams around is no longer there, and they didn't plan for that. So they go in circles. They go too far. They laugh too loud, talk too much, and act like they don't care when they really do. All because you walked off the stage while they were still performing. And this is where it gets interesting. When someone freaks out over your quiet growth, it's not about you at all. It's about the system that needed you to be small, predictable, and always available, suddenly realizing you're not any of those things anymore. First of all, you didn't expose them. Your existence did. It wasn't anything you said or did that really shook people. It was just that you kept living, growing, and showing up without the shame they quietly put on you. You didn't set up a meeting. You didn't prove your innocence. You didn't stand up for your past. You just kept being who you were, which didn't fit with the story they told themselves about you. And that's what made it so hard. It feels like a personal attack when you change, even if it has nothing to do with them, because their story depends on you staying the same. A lot of people think that exposure happens when you confront someone or drop a truth bomb. No, it doesn't. When your life becomes proof, that's when real exposure happens. Your stability quietly goes against every excuse they used to explain how they treated you or what they thought about you. When you're still standing, still functioning, and still becoming more grounded, focused, and self-directed, they can't say anything against that. They can't say it's not true without looking stupid, so they come apart instead. The fact that you didn't hold them accountable makes this even more uncomfortable for them. You didn't say you were sorry. You didn't even ask for people to understand you. You moved on without bringing them into your next chapter, which took away their ability to control the outcome. People can deal with being challenged. What they have trouble with is being left out of the story completely. It's also very scary when someone won't show their pain anymore. When you stop explaining yourself, stop sharing too much, and stop going over what hurts you just to make others feel better. They have to deal with their own part in things. That's when you start to feel defensive. That's when you see people act in ways that don't fit the situation. The truth is that your life became a mirror, not because you tried to show them something, but because mirrors don't need to mean to show what's there. They just do. You didn't tell on them by pointing fingers. You showed them that the version of reality they believed in was no longer true. After that, the meltdown isn't about you at all. It's about the end of a lie they weren't ready to let go of. Number 2, the meltdown began as soon as they saw that you were no longer broken. For a long time, people were fine with you being almost okay, trying, getting better, and figuring things out. They understood that version of you because it fit their ideas of what you should be like. You could grow, but only in small, easy-to-manage ways. Everything felt familiar as long as you still doubted yourself, second-guessed your choices, or needed someone to tell you were right. You could still read, reach, and explain. The change happened without anyone noticing. You didn't tell anyone that you were better. You didn't say you were whole. You stopped moving like someone who needed help. Your responses changed. You made better choices. You didn't go back to situations that drained you just to show loyalty or keep the peace. People saw that something was off at that point. Not louder, not colder, just over. People aren't bothered by confidence. They're bothered by completion. You can still talk to someone who is hurt. Someone who is no longer broken doesn't need anyone's permission, support, or help. That's what makes people panic. They suddenly realize that their time in your life is up. And no one likes being told they're no longer needed without being asked first. People also get an unspoken benefit when someone close to them is having a hard time. It gives them a reason to be there, a way to get what they want, and sometimes even a goal. You took that dynamic away. When you got better, you weren't someone to worry about, manage, or talk to anymore. You started to take charge of your own life, which is confusing for people who were used to being above, ahead of, or in charge of you. It wasn't just jealousy that made the meltdown happen. It came from losing. They lost access, relevance, and the version of you that they were used to that made them feel secure in their own role. That explains why the reaction seemed too strong or too late. They don't care who you are now. They are sad about the you they thought they knew. You didn't get cocky. You got whole. If someone was only comfortable with you in pieces, being whole feels like a threat they weren't ready for. In fact, you messed up a hierarchy without ever competing. The most chaotic thing you did wasn't winning or overtaking anyone. It wasn't about fighting for recognition or climbing over people to get ahead. It was much quieter, much deeper. You simply became uncontainable within the roles they expected you to play. You didn't step into a game they were controlling. You stepped outside it entirely. That alone is enough to break a hierarchy. Systems and people rely on predictability. And when someone refuses to play by the rules not aggressively, but simply by existing on their own terms, the entire balance shatters. They expected you to feed into the pattern, the subordinate, the helper, the confused, the indecisive. They were comfortable managing you, manipulating the pace, and keeping the narrative skewed in their favor. Then you stopped waiting for permission. You stopped making your growth convenient for them. You started moving, deciding, and acting according to your own timing and standards. Suddenly, the invisible ladder they were climbing or the control they thought they had looked irrelevant because it wasn't anchored to you anymore. People around you felt threatened, not because you competed with them, but because your freedom exposed how much of their influence depended on your limitations. Someone being free without creating chaos doesn't feed into the world of controlled hierarchies. You didn't try to show superiority, but your self-direction automatically highlighted their dependency. The cracks in their control were visible to everyone, and that's what fueled the panic, the overreactions, and the gossip. All because their position was destabilized by something they couldn't pin down or attack. The humor in all this is that you didn't even notice you were dismantling anything. You weren't plotting. You weren't performing. You simply refused to remain smaller than your potential. The fallout came from their failure to adjust to a reality where your existence and choices were no longer negotiable. By simply living fully and independently, you redefined the rules without speaking a word. Number 4, they're panicking because they can't control the story anymore. What triggers a meltdown faster than anything else is the realization that the narrative they carefully constructed about you is slipping through their fingers. For years, they shaped the story, your reputation, your behavior, your choices to feed their comfort. They whispered behind your back, exaggerated your flaws, minimized your wins, and painted you into a box that made them feel safe, superior, or in control. That story wasn't about truth. It was about their sense of power. And now, suddenly, the script doesn't work anymore. You didn't have to confront anyone or dismantle their lies outright. You just lived, made choices, and moved forward in a way that didn't line up with the version of you they had been feeding others. When reality refuses to match a narrative, the people invested in that story experience cognitive dissonance, a psychological panic where nothing feels stable anymore. Their authority, credibility, and even their self-image begin to crumble. They start overreacting, misreading your intentions, and lashing out in ways that make no sense because they're desperately trying to regain control over something that is, at this point, uncontrollable. The irony is brutal. The more they panic, the clearer it becomes to everyone around them that the story was never yours to begin with. Every whispered rumor, every defensive comment, and every manipulative gesture only highlights that their version of events was dependent on your compliance. The meltdown is their confession, unfiltered and messy. It's chaos disguised as anger, fear, and disbelief. It happens precisely because you chose to live authentically, without needing permission or validation. The thing that makes it almost funny, if you can detach from the tension, is that you're completely innocent in this. You didn't plot to destabilize anyone. You didn't even think about their story. You simply stopped fitting into it. By refusing to participate in the illusions they relied on, you forced them to confront the uncomfortable truth. They have no power over your reality anymore. That loss of control is the source of every frantic reaction, every awkward comment, and every meltdown that now seems utterly out of proportion. Number 5. Your calm is being misread as arrogance. And that's the funny part. The moment you stopped reacting to chaos the way they expected, people started noticing something strange: your calmness. You weren't louder, sharper, or more aggressive. You were simply steady. Your energy didn't spike when others tried to provoke you. Your focus didn't waver when they threw drama your way. That's when it got uncomfortable for them. Calmness, when everyone around is anxious, often reads as arrogance. It's not about pride, it's about consistency. But people used to measuring their worth through comparison can handle someone operating outside their emotional roller coaster. For years, they relied on your reactions to validate their own existence. Your panic, your confusion, and your uncertainty gave them structure, predictability, and even purpose. Once you stopped feeding the chaos, they started over-interpreting everything you did. Your silence became a statement. Your boundaries became a challenge. Your composure became a sign of superiority, even though all you were doing was existing without needing approval. That's the beauty and the humor of it. You didn't try to intimidate anyone, yet they felt exposed, cornered, and unsettled simply because you didn't conform to their expectations. What makes this even more destabilizing is that calmness cannot be faked convincingly for long. People can mimic confidence, act like they're in control, or project bravado. But your calmness is rooted in internal alignment. It comes from clarity, self-respect, and independence. And when someone who has relied on their ability to manipulate your responses encounters a person who doesn't react predictably, it triggers a panic they can't rationalize. The meltdown that follows is often loud, dramatic, or over the top because they're trying to reclaim control they never had. But the irony is undeniable. Your composed presence is not an attack. It's a reflection of your own mastery over self and circumstance. While they struggle to interpret it correctly, you continue moving steady and unbothered, proving that sometimes the strongest disruption comes not from confrontation or noise, but from being quietly unshakable in a world desperate to provoke a reaction. Number 6. You accidentally exposed who was only powerful by proximity. Some people only look important because they've latched onto someone else's energy, success, or struggle. They've built their influence on access, on being attached to the version of you that could be managed, pushed, or guided. Their power isn't real, it's borrowed. When you step into a place where you no longer need to be managed, when you stop feeding into the roles that once made them feel significant, their whole foundation collapses. That's when the meltdown begins, not because you attacked them, but because you simply stopped being the source of their perceived strength. The moment you became self-directed, fully accountable for your own energy and decisions, the illusion they had cultivated was exposed. The people who thrived on proximity suddenly looked small, weak, and reactive. They scrambled because they realized that their identity was intertwined with controlling or benefiting from you. Without that dynamic, they have nothing to lean on, nothing to inflate their ego. And suddenly, they feel invisible in the very space where they once claimed authority. It's even more destabilizing because you didn't plan this. You didn't intend to reveal weaknesses. You didn't speak out to unmask anyone. You just existed freely, Freedom has a way of spotlighting people who relied on manipulation, leverage, or access rather than genuine competence. All the energy they invested in controlling, influencing, or observing you becomes useless. Their reactions get louder, more erratic, and sometimes ridiculous because they are processing a sudden collapse of identity. The irony is stark. The meltdown makes it obvious who was never capable of real power and who has been living off the energy of others. You're watching it happen without even participating, quietly moving forward, building your own path. You didn't expose them by force. You exposed them by living beyond the limits they assigned to you. The fallout is their responsibility, and their panic is the proof that their authority was never as solid as it appeared. Your life simply made visible what they were too fragile to maintain on their own. Number 7. They can't copy what they don't understand. One of the most frustrating things for people watching your rise is that they can't replicate it. They study your moves, your timing, your habits, and even your energy, trying desperately to reverse engineer what makes you work. But what they fail to see is that your growth isn't a formula. It's integration. It's the sum of your experiences, your choices, your failures, and your unseen battles, all combined in a way that only you could produce. You didn't follow a playbook, and that makes your presence untouchable and, in a sense, threatening. They try to imitate confidence, productivity, or discipline, but it falls flat, because those things aren't separate from your inner alignment. Your calm under pressure, your decisiveness, and your refusal to bend to manipulation, these aren't techniques. They're reflections of a life lived deliberately, consciously, and authentically. The more they try to copy it, the more obvious it becomes that they're pretending. Every forced attempt to mimic you highlights the gap between their facade and your reality. That's where the panic sets in. They realize they're stuck in imitation, while you're advancing effortlessly in authenticity. This inability to copy you destabilizes people in ways that make their reactions extreme. They become loud, critical, defensive, or obsessive because they see your progress and can't reconcile it with their own stagnation. The envy isn't just about what you have, it's about what you represent, proof that personal evolution is possible, but only when it's real, internal, and unmanufactured. And the ironic twist is that you don't even have to try to intimidate them. Your life lived without pretense already outpaces any strategy they might attempt. They panic not because you're ahead of them, but because they can't understand, control, or replicate the foundation beneath your achievements. Their frustration, confusion, and meltdown are the natural consequences of confronting a reality they cannot steal. Your authenticity is untouchable, and every meltdown around you is just a reminder that some things can't be faked, copied, or contained, especially a life lived in alignment with truth. Number 8. Your evolution exposed who is pretending to evolve. The most uncomfortable truth people face when you grow is realizing how little growth they've actually done themselves. They talk about self-improvement, mindfulness, and ambition, but those words are often just window dressing, an image carefully curated to convince others and sometimes themselves that they're moving forward. Meanwhile, you are actually changing. You're shedding old patterns, making better decisions, and holding yourself accountable in ways that aren't performative. That contrast is brutal, and that's why the meltdown starts. They can't hide behind their act anymore. Your evolution is like a mirror they can't close. Every choice you make, every boundary you enforce, and every step forward in confidence highlights the gap between what they say and what they do. They feel exposed, not because of anything you've done to them directly, but because your life makes their pretenses visible. That discomfort turns into panic, defensiveness, and overreaction. Suddenly, their casual arrogance or assumed superiority collapses under the weight of someone who is quietly, deliberately becoming more than they are. What's even more destabilizing is that you're not performing growth. You're not announcing your achievements, bragging about your clarity, or trying to make anyone look small. You simply exist as someone who has integrated their lessons and experiences into real change. The authenticity of your evolution forces them to confront themselves in a way they aren't prepared for. And humans by nature resist confrontation that comes without warning. When they see your life moving forward while theirs feels stagnant, panic, jealousy, and irrational reactions are inevitable. The meltdown isn't about competition, it's about truth. Your presence makes it clear who has been honest with themselves and who has been faking it. The irony is that the more they try to explain you away, belittle your progress, or disrupt your peace, the more obvious it becomes that their growth was never real. Your evolution shines a light on false versions of themselves, and the chaos that follows is the natural result of being first to face a truth they have long ignored. Some people talk about growth, but you live it. Number 9. The meltdown is proof they were watching you closer than you knew. One of the most revealing aspects of human behavior is how closely people monitor what they fear losing control over. Long before the meltdown, they were observing you in subtle ways, noticing your habits, your patterns, the timing of your decisions, even the way your energy shifted in certain spaces. They didn't admit it, and you likely had no clue, but their sense of security was tied to knowing you inside out, predicting your moves, and managing the impact you could have on their environment. Their fixation was invisible, but it was real. When you changed, evolved, or stopped conforming to their expectations, it wasn't just inconvenient, it was a shock to their system. They had memorized a version of you that no longer existed. Every action you took that didn't fit their mental map caused panic because they realized all the observation had been built on a false premise. All the energy they invested in tracking, controlling, and anticipating your behavior suddenly felt wasted. That's why the meltdown seems exaggerated or disproportionate. It isn't about the present moment, it's about the collapse of months or years of covert monitoring. The irony is unmistakable. Their obsession with you made them blind to the fact that their influence was limited. They were so focused on studying and predicting you that they failed to notice you were quietly learning, adjusting, and moving beyond their scope. And because your evolution happened silently, without fanfare or confrontation, it hit them like a revelation they weren't prepared to process. That's why the meltdown often looks chaotic, absurd, or over the top. It's not just about you. It's about their panic over losing the illusion of control. Every defensive comment, every awkward reaction, and every attempt to reassert relevance is evidence of just how closely they were watching and how unnervingly dependent they had become on that surveillance. Your life, your calm, and your freedom forced them to face the uncomfortable truth. They were never in control. When that realization finally hits, it triggers a storm that can't be contained. Number 10. You broke an unspoken agreement, and they never told you it existed. Some of the most powerful reactions come not from what you did, but from what people assumed you would do. Somewhere along the line, an invisible contract was formed, not written, not spoken, but deeply understood by those around you. It dictated who you were allowed to be, what boundaries you could set, how far you could grow, and which parts of yourself could remain hidden. For years, they relied on this unspoken agreement to keep you within limits that suited them. They expected compliance, predictability, and availability. And then quietly, without fanfare, you broke it. You didn't announce a rebellion. You didn't confront anyone about their expectations. You simply started living on your own terms. You made choices that felt right for you without seeking approval or reassurance. In doing so, you shattered a framework they didn't even bother to communicate. The shock is intense because it feels like betrayal to someone who thought you were theirs to shape. The meltdown that follows isn't really about your actions. It's about their loss of control and the collapse of a narrative they assumed would never be challenged. What makes this so disorienting for them is the combination of invisibility and inevitability. They never saw it coming because the rules were never official, and yet their reactions are explosive because their sense of order depended entirely on those invisible boundaries. Every boundary you establish, every decision you make without their consent feels like a direct affront, even though it's simply you living authentically. The beauty, almost cruel in its simplicity, is that you didn't need to prove a point. You didn't need to create drama or make a spectacle. Your life lived openly exposed the truth. Unspoken agreements are only as powerful as the compliance they rely on. Once you refuse to comply, the entire structure collapses, and the meltdown becomes a theatrical display of desperation, confusion, and the harsh reality that their expectations never mattered to you and never will. Number 11. They're spiraling because your freedom made their excuses loud. One of the most unsettling experiences for people around you is witnessing your freedom in motion while they remain trapped in their own justifications. For years, they relied on a carefully constructed narrative to explain why they weren't progressing, why they weren't stepping up, or why they weren't taking risks. Your life moving forward, without hesitation or apology, exposes every one of those excuses for what they really are: fragile stories designed to protect their ego. That's when the spiral begins. Your freedom isn't flashy. It doesn't scream. You don't need to announce that you're living on your own terms. You simply stop bending to others' expectations, stop asking for permission, and stop over-explaining yourself. That silent independence is like a spotlight on people who've built their lives on delay, fear, or justification. Suddenly, their internal dialogue, the reasoning they've used to feel comfortable in their own stagnation, becomes impossible to ignore. Your presence forces a reckoning, and their reactions become louder, messier, and more erratic because they are confronting the truth of their own inaction. It's fascinating and ironic because your life isn't even about them. You aren't trying to shame anyone, expose anyone, or make anyone look bad. Yet, your forward motion acts as a mirror. Every choice you make that reflects clarity, courage, and purpose is an unspoken commentary on what they've avoided. Humans by nature resist being confronted with inconvenient truths, especially when they didn't ask for the reflection. That resistance manifests as panic, defensiveness, overanalysis, or emotional outbursts. The meltdown is not evidence of your power over them, it's evidence of their dependency on false narratives. They can't replicate your authenticity, and they can't explain away the reality that your freedom exists independently of their approval. Every awkward comment, passive-aggressive move, or sudden concern is simply noise born out of desperation. The sound of their excuses, crumbling under the weight of your unshakable presence. And the wild part is that you didn't do anything intentionally provocative, you just refused to live small. In doing so, you exposed the truth they never wanted to face. Number 12, you didn't win. The game collapsed around you. The chaos you're witnessing isn't about victory in the traditional sense. You didn't have to beat anyone, outsmart anyone, or dominate a system to trigger the meltdown. What happened is far more powerful. The structure itself couldn't survive your presence. You stopped playing by the rules, stopped participating in the invisible games, and simply lived in a way that made the existing system crumble on its own. That's what makes it so destabilizing for everyone around you. They thought the game controlled you, but in reality, your refusal to play the way they expected exposed the fragility of the entire setup. People get attached to patterns, hierarchies, and routines because it gives them a sense of control. When someone in the system stops moving predictably, it sends a ripple through everything. They panic, they overreact, and they scramble for explanations because the foundation they relied on, which they assumed was unshakable, suddenly feels unstable. And here's the thing. You weren't even targeting the system. You weren't trying to take anyone down. You weren't winning a contest. You were just existing with integrity, focus, and independence. That's enough to break things that were never built to handle truth. The meltdown is loud, messy, and over the top because people are forced to confront their own reliance on illusions. They realize that control, influence, and perceived power were all contingent on your compliance or predictability. Once that disappears, there's nothing holding it together. That's why their reactions seem exaggerated or irrational. They're not responding to a threat. They're responding to the collapse of a carefully maintained world. What's remarkable is that you can walk through it all without raising your voice, making a statement, or taking an aggressive stance. Your presence alone is enough to prove that the game never really mattered, except to those who depended on it to feel secure. While they panic, scramble, and try to restore balance, you move forward quietly, untouched by the chaos, showing that true power doesn't come from winning a game. It comes from living authentically while the rest of the world struggles to adjust. Number 13, they're laughing nervously because denial is failing. When people start laughing in awkward, forced ways or cracking jokes that don't land, it's rarely about humor. It's about panic dressed up as levity. They're trying to maintain control over a reality they can no longer deny. For a long time, denial was their safety net. They told themselves stories that justified their behavior, minimized your presence, or explained away your growth. But as your life began to operate outside the boundaries they set, that denial started to crumble. The nervous laughter is the sound of a defense mechanism failing, the audible evidence that the truth is hitting harder than they can handle. What's fascinating is how exposed it makes them. Every laugh, every overreaction, and every awkward comment is a signal that the narrative they've been clinging to is collapsing. They thought they could manage you, interpret your moves, or contain your energy. Now they can't. Your calm, your freedom, your consistency, all of it contrasts starkly with the chaotic internal state they're trying to hide. The nervous humor is an unconscious attempt to reclaim composure, to convince themselves and anyone watching that they're still in control, even as everything inside them screams the opposite. The meltdown that follows isn't random, it's a precise reaction to the dissonance they feel between their perception and reality. They're confronting a truth they tried to ignore for too long. You are not what they assumed. You do not belong to the story they wrote, and their attempts to manipulate the outcome are failing. Their laughter, their jokes, and their forced bravado are just the surface of a deeper emotional storm. The irony is undeniable. You didn't provoke this intentionally. You didn't attack, criticize, or manipulate. You simply lived authentically and refused to perform the role they expected. Their nervous laughter is proof that denial has limits, and their meltdown is proof that facing truth without preparation is terrifying. While they scramble to process it, you continue moving forward, untouched by the chaos, a living reminder that honesty, consistency, and self-alignment are far more disruptive than confrontation ever could be. Number 14. The funniest part is you didn't even notice at first. The most poetic aspect of all this chaos is that while everyone else was losing their minds over your actions, or rather your presence, you were completely unaware. You weren't orchestrating drama, provoking reactions, or even trying to be impressive. You were simply living your life, making choices that felt right, and stepping into the version of yourself you had been working toward. That unintentional nature of your impact is what makes the situation almost hilarious to anyone watching from the outside, and eventually to you as well. People around you expected you to act in a certain way. They wanted reasons, apologies, or explanations. They used what they knew about you in the past to figure out how to control, manipulate, or read you. Then you stopped doing what they told you to do. You didn't say anything about it. You didn't say what it was. You didn't even think about how much trouble it would cause. You moved with purpose, clarity, and self-respect, and you just stepped into the life you were meant to live. That's when the breakdown started. Every overreaction, weird comment, and desperate attempt to get back in control was caused by truth they couldn't handle. You had moved on without talking to them. The fact that you're innocent makes things even more unstable. People can deal with being confronted, challenged, or even criticized, but they can't stand it when someone changes quietly, on purpose, and successfully without ever telling them. That's why the reaction seems so extreme, out of whack, and even silly at times. The more you work on yourself and your growth, the more clear it becomes to others how much they relied on your past limitations. You can't say enough about how funny it is. You keep living, learning, and growing while they spiral out of control, completely unaware that your very existence has caused chaos. You didn't plan it or try to make it happen. You just changed into a version of yourself that they can't control anymore. That unintentional brilliance is what makes the situation both funny and annoying at the same time. You didn't have to do anything, but your life went on and theirs fell apart. This shows that sometimes the best thing you can do is just be yourself. What you just saw: chaos, the panic, the overreactions, and the frantic attempts to get things back under control has nothing to do with you. People are dealing with a reality they weren't ready for. You are no longer predictable, no longer limited, and no longer following the rules they secretly relied on. Every time you lose your cool, every time you act weird, and every time you try to explain yourself away is proof that your growth, calmness, freedom, and honesty have broken down illusions that were held up for too long. What makes it even more amazing is that you didn't plan it, you didn't fight for it, and at first, you didn't even notice how it affected other people. You just chose yourself, your honesty, and your growth. That alone caused more trouble than any fight or argument could ever do. It's not just about seeing people fall apart. It's about realizing how strong you can be when you live with purpose and without apology. It's about understanding that you don't need to show anyone that you're worth something, trick them, or make them see your worth. When you live in full alignment with your truth, your life speaks louder than any words, shows what was always hidden, and causes changes or panics without you having to do anything. The meltdowns around you are just echoes of the change you've made, the end of false stories, the exposure of lies, and the revealing of reality that they weren't ready to accept. This is a reminder that your calmness, independence, and authenticity are more disruptive than chaos, more powerful than manipulation, and much more revealing than confrontation. You don't have to fight anyone to change the way things are. You just need to fully embrace yourself. When the dust settles, the people who were freaking out will realize too late that it was never about you. They were about things they couldn't control anymore. Your life is proof of what happens when someone doesn't follow the rules. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more videos that reveal the truth and raise awareness. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Understanding these dynamics can change how you use your power and presence in your own life. Your growth doesn't just affect you, it changes the energy around you in ways that most people aren't ready for. May God bless you.